Idaho Fish and Game joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And of course, we wanted to mention Terry Thompson and John Procott joining us. Bill Colley, too, and I'm answering some of the questions that come in. Well, I'm all right. They're answering the questions. I'm just reading them off. We'll leave it at that. That's why they're here. But I want to mention if you've got a comment or question, of course, you can reach us at 208 736 0300. Or if you've got the app on your smartphone, as Benny in Richfield does, he just sent a question along. And we're at 721. It is 46. He asks about the situation, he said, to north of Haley, where you have a lot of elk who are obviously getting in the road. And of course, some of the collisions are somewhat nasty in that area. But we were just chatting briefly about this off air. It's really because it's not farming area or ranching area. You have a different, you have to have a really different protocol that you got to deal with.
Yeah, and I think John is probably well suited to talk to this one because he, as part of his job, is very involved in the depredation program and trying to keep elk and or big game off of ag land. So do you want to try to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, a little bit of background to the situation. I think it was back in the 1990s, we collared several elk in that area. And it was interesting to see a lot of their movements. Obviously, that herd has been there quite a few years and it's fluctuated over time, and the department's really paid attention to it over time. In an urban scenario like that, I know we've tried to structure hunts different ways in the past to put pressure on these elk where we could, just to help maintain that population level. I know there have been times where we have gained on that, sometimes lost. When it comes to maybe other actions as far as deterring elk behavior, it's a different landscape down there. Your urban environments are full of several or several hundred different property owners and try to collaborate. In other scenarios where you can implement different control actions, typically you have larger properties. It's a lot easier. When you have several hundred landowners in an area or property owners, it's a different environment. And obviously, taking that into the equation, it definitely can limit what you can do in those areas. But we're continually monitoring that. We've discussed several other different options of what we can be doing up there. But I don't know, Terry, anything to add to that?
Well, one of the things that these elk herds in the Wood River Valley, and I'll throw deer in there too, they've become what we call residential animals in the sense that they don't move out of the residential areas, and it does not make them available during hunting season because you can't have hunters going backyard to backyard looking for elk. So, when we can't put hunting pressure on them, those populations typically would grow. And so what happens is you start getting more and more animals, and I think that's what he was referring to. If you go north of Ketchum in the morning and in the evening, those animals stay in the river bottoms during the day, and then they move over into some ag lands across the highway. And they've done some reductions of speed limits. They put the warning signs up, the flash, but we still see vehicle collisions up there with elk.
John, one of your areas of specialty, of course, is dealing with chronic wasting disease, and I've been of the impression it's mainly an eastern Idaho thing because of proximity, I guess, to Wyoming, where they've had some issues with it in Montana. But clearly, we don't really know, I guess, about just how much of it is really spread throughout Idaho, do we?
Yeah, right now, CWD has not been found in Idaho. We do have a monitoring program, same as Wyoming and several other states. We've been monitoring for the disease since like 1997. And right now, it's knocking on the borders of three different states: northern Montana, more central western Montana. It's also in Wyoming and Utah. So we've got several different. We actually changed our protocol in 2018. We have some areas where we are testing deer on a yearly basis. That's in the Panhandle for a lot of whitetail deer. Then I guess a lot of the, I guess it would be east of Salmon, a lot of that country, and then a lot of eastern Idaho. Also across the state, and this is kind of new, we are requesting or asking hunters voluntarily to submit deer and elk CWD samples. Kind of a new thing for the voluntary side of things. But if you want, and it's a great way as a hunter to get involved in management. If CWD is in Idaho, or we want to know where it is. What, a lot of that. Thanks for pulling up the map, Terry. Um, yeah. Uh, in the Magic Valley region, if you do harvest a deer and you want to get it tested for chronic wasting disease, we've got a deer head collection freezer right at the Magic Valley Regional Office. It's just off the end of the Hunter Education Building. You can pull in there. There's a bunch of sampling kits. You can just fill out a tag of information, attach that to your deer head, and throw it in the freezer, and we'll process it. You can always call in ahead of time, see if there's a biologist on staff there, and we can pull samples immediately. Test results typically take a while to come back, but yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Well, so people can actually, I mean, can they actually process what they, what their kill still and eat it? Because as you mentioned, they're not going to get a result in a couple of days.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I would recommend processing your game animal. If a sample ever were to come back positive, we would be contacting that hunter right away. And right now, the Center of Disease Control recommendations would be that you would not eat that animal. Again, it's up to you as to what you decide. But yeah, just want to remind you,
You
it
could
has
put it
a
in the freezer then until you get the test results
Oh,
back.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead and process the animal. One thing that we, do ask hunters is, especially with carcass transport, there is an importation of carcass ban in the state of Idaho. You cannot bring um, deer, elk, or moose carcasses into the state unless they've been deboned and quartered. We don't want any spinal or brain material brought in from another state. There's a bunch of really good resources on our website, or you can always call into the regional office. Um, we've got several CWD laws that have been in place for a few years now. Some of that would be like urine ban. People, I think it's more of a whitetail thing, but using urine to attract animals. There's a ban against that in the state and several other laws. So go to our website. That information's all available there, or you can always call in and talk to a biologist on staff.
I was going to say, um, if people are going to a check station, can you do some testing there while they come into a check station?
Definitely, we will have materials to pull samples then. Check stations, any regional office, or even if you meet an officer out on the road, they may be able to pull the sample for you too.
And when we talk about pulling samples, it's taking lymph nodes, and because and I think it's worth repeating what John just talked about in terms of if you hunt out of state and bring animals in. We have had situations in years past where chronic waste CWD positive animals have come back in the state from that were harvested in an adjacent state, and luckily we have not had anything come from that because chronic wasting disease is and I'm going to look to John to help me out here, but it's a what they call a prion.
Right, which bovine encephalitis similar to that. We got to get to a break first. We'll get back to this discussion. I've got news coming up at 7:30. We're at 48 on News Radio 1310, and want to mention Benito is back today, so he'll be along with the news in just a moment on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Also wanted to mention at 8:30 this morning we have Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office joining us, and at 9 o'clock this morning it's Pastors Roundtable. Pastors are going to be talking about the challenges they face in their individual lives and in their work. John Procott and Terry Thompson joining us this morning from Idaho Fish and Game. We're at 46 at 7:33. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. And we were in the middle of a discussion about chronic wasting disease, and John was pointing out it's caused by something called a prion, which is a protein. It's not really even a living thing, is it?
No, it's not a living thing, and a prion, prion, they're both the same thing. People say different things, but it's not a living thing. Basically, it's a protein that will misfold in the brain, and then you have accumulations of it. The disease is actually part of, it's in the family transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, which is it's related to scrapie in sheep, mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease in humans. Um, transmissible. Obviously, it can transmit from animal to animal. Spongiform, basically, a denoting or porous type structure. That's what happens in the brain. It becomes very spongy. And then encephalopathy is basically a disease, functioning or something affecting the brain or nervous system of an animal. One thing Terry had brought up earlier, and I forgot to mention, samples from roadkill deer. We do have a roadkill mortality application on our webpage. If you find a roadkill, you can go ahead and submit a roadkill mortality survey for us. That'll give you back a confirmation number. We do, voluntarily, we would appreciate a lot of those heads as well. For a roadkill for us, I guess in the scale of rating, it's we get more. Basically, when we survey animals for CWD, it's a point scale. So a buck has a higher chance of having CWD compared to a doe, typically, especially an older adult buck, because again, it's transmissible from animal to animal. So they have a higher likelihood of maybe having the disease. So it's a higher on the point scale for us. So is a roadkill deer, because it could be a suspect animal, especially if it's sick. A couple other cool facts about CWD. The prions or prions, because they're not living, you can't like administer a vaccine because it's not a virus or a bacteria. It's nothing you can really kill. The body doesn't recognize um, the prion as something foreign. And because it's misfolded, your body is always regenerating a lot of these prions. Um, it's common. I mean, obviously, it's how we live. Our body is constantly regenerating, and a lot of these prions, because they're misfolded, your body can't really get rid of them. And that's what makes this disease really tough. Is there really isn't a cure. It's an always fatal disease. Um, but a couple other cool facts, because it's not a living thing. It can subsist in the soil for a long time. It's got a really positive ionic bond, so it can, I guess, attach really well
A
to.
grazing animal could pick it up that way.
Yep, it bonds really well to, say, clay soils, and then plants can actually uptake it through their roots, and it can become airly in the plant, and it can remain infectivity in a plant as well. And again, you can't really kill it unless you have extreme heat or really harsh chemicals, so it can subsist out on the landscape for a very long time.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's one of the concerns, and that's why John talks about, even roadkills. The more data points we can get, the more monitoring that we can do. Um, it just allows us to have a better sense on if it's going to come here. And on break, we talked, that the deer that are in western Montana or western Wyoming, they don't understand state boundary lines, and so it's logic would say that sooner or later some of these deer are going to cross over into Idaho, and so our goal is to monitor it as heavily as we can so that we can have early detection. And as John says, it's you can't eradicate it, but but we have plans in place that when it does show up in state, that we as the game management agency can take some actions.
And there's going to be, as it advances, you're going to see more and more symptoms in the animal. And you were both recommending during the news break that if you recognize these symptoms, probably you shouldn't take that animal. You should just leave it alone.
Yeah, I would definitely call and report it. Another interesting fact about CWD, animals may have the disease, but they really don't show symptoms until a few years down the road. So a deer could look extremely healthy, though it could come back as positive for CWD. You don't really know until you have that animal tested.
We have a caller looking to join the conversation. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, John, question for you. Will that will that disease spread to other species, specifically for meat cattle?
Um, so as far as we know, the research has pointed to it has not tested or crossed those boundaries before. Right now, it's a cervid disease, so animals like reindeer, whitetail and mule deer, elk and moose. A lot of people ask about pronghorn. Pronghorn are in a different family. Until Capridae, we don't have to. We have it has not crossed those boundaries before, so no, you do not have to worry.
Okay. Thank you.
Want to thank him for the call. Yeah, that would be a huge concern, but many of these other species have their own versions of it anyway.
Yes, they do. Like cattle, it would be mad cow disease.
Yeah.
Yep.
Quickly, because we haven't touched on this, but the other day, I had a guest here on Tuesday. We were talking about a story out of a National Review, where a guy was recommending that we could revive the western buffalo herds. And several callers chimed in and said, "What? You're going to bring in brucellosis?" Uh, so again, that's always a concern too, because that can be transmissible to cattle.
Yep, yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. So we have several different areas in Idaho where we are sampling for brucellosis as well, and those hunters typically will get kits in the mail. All it takes is a blood sample, submit it in, and I think that's Idaho Department of Ag that takes those tests and tests them for us.
Right, right. So we've got a lot of mixing and a lot of ideas going on. And when you said they don't recognize state boundaries, that's why they also don't recognize highways.
Yeah, we sometimes expect wildlife to adhere to society's rules, and unfortunately, they didn't get that when they went to wild animal training. So yeah, it's there's and I think the message that we want to give is, we're not here to scare or cause over concern, but at the same time, these are very real issues from a wildlife management standpoint, and we rely heavily upon hunters to help us as we monitor, because they're going to be out there harvesting these animals, and it's kind of their contribution to science, if you will, by bringing the heads in and letting us pull lymph nodes.
Quickly, we got about a couple of minutes before the break, and there was something you had here on the agenda today. It's called fading ink, and I was curious as to what you meant by that.
So, if there's probably many people out there that a few years back can remember when the ink on the hunting and fishing licenses started to fade, and all of a sudden they would get a conservation officer checking them. They'd pull out their license, and it would be a blank white piece of paper. Kind of makes your heart sink. Well, unfortunately, that condition has resurfaced, but we think we know why this time. Those plastic pouches that we generously hand out and said, "Hey, or put your license in that when you put it in your wallet." Well, there's some kind of chemical reaction going on in there, and that's causing the ink to fade. So if you find yourself, in fact, I'd encourage everybody now, if you have your license in one of those pouches, pull it out, look at it. We don't want you to get in the field and find out after the fact that your license is faded. And if so, you can bring it into any Fish and Game office, and we will reprint it for them.
Very quickly, again, we've got about a minute before the break. Billy in Shoshone is asking, he says, is it legal to scout before the season after dark with a spotlight?
Jen and I are looking at each other like, um,
I don't think it's legal. I know it's illegal if you have a gun in the vehicle. I know that. We can follow up with that question, I think, at a later date.
yeah. And if you need to know that answer immediately, give us a call at the regional office and we can have you talk to one of our enforcement officers, 208-324-4359.
There's a phrase back east, it's called jacking deer, and it's used to refer to these people who are out of season with the spotlight.
Yep.
And I don't think it's commonly used beyond the west of the Mississippi, but that was always considered to be one of those things that you were an embarrassment to the hunting community if you were one of those people who was thought to be involved in doing that.
Yeah, and we just actually had a conversation about spotlighting the other day, one of those hallway conversations, and but that centers on use of spotlights for predators type hunting and private land versus public land. So his question is a little bit unique. So give us a call.
All right. Hey, want to take a break shortly? We've got more coming up with Idaho Fish and Game. John Procott and Terry Thompson joining us this morning. It is almost 7:45. We're at 47. The Rush Morning Update in just a minute. Bill Colley as well on Magic Valley this morning.